Airport staff humiliated and kicked out Sasha Obama, but everything changed when her father showed up. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. The sun had barely risen over Washington, D.C., painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Inside Reagan National Airport, the morning rush was in full swing. Announcements echoed overhead, the hum of voices blended with the rhythmic clatter of rolling suitcases, and the rich aroma of coffee mixed with the faint scent of jet fuel. Amidst the chaos, Sasha Obama, 21 years old and determined to step out of her father's shadow, adjusted her backpack and checked the time, 6:30 a.m. She was heading to New York City to present her research at a prestigious youth conference. This was her moment, her opportunity to showcase her hard work and ideas. The night before, her father had given her a pep talk, his words still echoed in her mind. "You're there because of your dedication. No one can take that from you." But what should have been a smooth trip quickly turned into a humiliating ordeal. As Sasha approached the check-in counter, she greeted the agent politely, placing her ticket and ID on the counter. The woman, wearing a name tag that read M. Reynolds, barely glanced up until she saw Sasha's name. Her expression shifted slightly. "Flying to New York?" Reynolds asked, her tone sharp. "Yes," Sasha replied. Reynolds lifted the ticket, inspecting it as if it might be fake. A long pause followed, the air growing tense. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" The question hung in the air, dripping with skepticism. Sasha blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, of course." "Is there a problem?" Reynolds pressed her lips into a thin line, then flipped through her computer screen. "We don't usually see passengers like," she stopped mid-sentence, as if realizing she had already said too much. "Never mind. Just making sure everything's in order." Sasha felt irritation bubble up but let it slide until she noticed Reynolds whispering to another agent while discreetly pointing in her direction. A second agent, a man with a stern expression, approached. He scrutinized Sasha's ID with exaggerated care. "This ticket is for business class," he said, his tone heavy with suspicion. "I know," Sasha responded, firm but composed. "It's mine." The agent exchanged a glance with Reynolds, then gave a reluctant nod. "Fine. Go ahead." His dismissive tone made it clear he didn't believe she belonged there. Sasha grabbed her ticket and ID, clenching her jaw as she walked away. Eyes followed her, curious glances from other travelers who had witnessed the encounter but remained silent. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." She took a deep breath and pressed forward. But the ordeal wasn't over. At security, after passing through the metal detector without issue, a TSA agent suddenly blocked her path. "Excuse me, ma'am. We need to conduct a secondary screening." Sasha frowned. Her bag sat untouched on the conveyor belt. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "Just a random check," the agent replied, though his tone said otherwise. Frustration rising, Sasha complied. But the random check turned invasive, a pat down, a full rummage through her bag, and repeated questions. "Who bought your ticket?" the agent asked, holding up her boarding pass. "I did," Sasha replied, voice clipped. "It's for a conference." The agent smirked. "Pretty fancy conference if you're flying business class." Heat rushed to Sasha's face, but she bit her tongue. She knew better than to escalate the situation. When it was finally over, the agent handed back her belongings with an indifferent, "You're good to go." Sasha checked her watch, less than an hour until her flight. Her composure was shaken, but her resolve? Unbreakable. But what happened next? Let's just say, when her father found out, everything changed. Stay tuned. Airport staff humiliated Sasha Obama, but when her father showed up, everything changed. Before we jump in, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Sasha Obama picked up her pace, determined not to let the morning's events shake her. She had a flight to catch, a conference to attend, and a message to deliver. But as she neared her gate, an uneasy feeling crept over her. A small cluster of airline staff stood whispering, their eyes flicking in her direction. Something was off. Before she could brush it aside, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor stepped forward. "Miss, I need to see your ticket and ID again." Her tone was devoid of courtesy. Sasha exhaled sharply, her patience wearing thin, but she handed over her documents without protest. The woman studied them with exaggerated care, then her expression darkened. "We've been informed there may be an issue with your ticket. Please come with me." Sasha frowned. "What kind of issue?" "Just a routine verification," the woman replied, already turning toward a side corridor. Every instinct in Sasha screamed that this wasn't right. But she followed, her heart pounding. As they walked, she realized they were heading away from the gate area, deeper into the airport's restricted zones. Then, the woman stopped abruptly, turned, and delivered a chilling verdict. "I'm sorry, but we can't allow you to board this flight. You'll need to leave the airport." Sasha stared at her, stunned. "What? Why?" The woman simply shrugged. "We have our reasons." A slow, hot wave of fury surged through Sasha. "This is unacceptable. I've done nothing wrong." The woman crossed her arms. "If you don't leave willingly, we'll have security escort you out." Sasha clenched her fists, humiliation burning through her. Eyes stinging, pulse racing. She refused to let them see her break. She grabbed her phone and called the one person who could fix this. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "I need you." The response came in a calm, steady voice. "I'm on my way." But for Sasha, those words weren't enough to quell the storm brewing inside her. The corridor where she had been pulled aside felt eerily quiet compared to the chaos of the terminal. The woman who had led her there had disappeared back to the gate, leaving Sasha standing alone, near a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Her fingers tightened around her bag, adrenaline flooding her veins. Her instincts told her to step back into the main terminal, where there were witnesses. But something held her in place. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father, "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Stay where you are." Sasha exhaled shakily. His reassurance helped, but the sting of indignation remained fresh. She replayed the morning's events in her mind. The faces of the TSA agents, the airline staff, the whispers, the pointed fingers. The pattern was clear. She had grown up recognizing the quiet, insidious ways people let their biases slip into their actions. But this was blatant. Before she could dwell on it further, the sound of approaching footsteps jolted her. 2 TSA agents appeared, one male, one female. Both stiff, both stern. The man gripped a clipboard like a shield, while the woman held a handheld scanner. "Ma'am, we need to conduct an additional screening." Sasha's jaw tightened. "I've already been screened, twice," she said, keeping her voice firm but controlled. She had been taught the power of composure, even in the face of blatant injustice. The woman's expression didn't waver. "This is a random check, ma'am. Compliance is mandatory." Sasha stared at them, reading between the lines. Reluctantly, she placed her bag on the table. The agents unzipped it, rummaging through her belongings with zero regard for order. Her laptop was flipped open as if they expected hidden compartments. Her toiletries bag? Dumped out. The contents spilled across the table in a messy heap. Sasha's hands balled into fists. "Is this really necessary?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay calm. The male agent ignored her. Instead, he picked up a book from her bag and held it up. "What's this about?" His tone bordered on accusatory. Sasha blinked in disbelief. "It's a book for the conference I'm attending," she replied. The agent squinted at the cover, as if it were written in another language, then tossed it aside like trash. The female agent ran the scanner over her laptop, slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the power she held in that moment. Sasha's eyes darted around, hoping to catch the attention of anyone who might intervene. But the corridor remained deserted. The weight of isolation pressed down on her, making the moment feel even more oppressive. Finally, the agent stepped back. Then came the final blow. "We'll need to hold on to your bag for further analysis," the male agent announced. His tone left no room for negotiation. Sasha's breath caught in her throat. "What? No." But before she could argue, before she could even process what was happening, everything changed. Because just then, Sasha Obama's father walked through those airport doors. And in that moment, the entire atmosphere shifted. Airport staff humiliated Sasha Obama, but when her father showed up, everything changed. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Sasha Obama stepped forward instinctively, her voice sharp and unwavering. "You can't just take my things. I have a flight to catch." The female agent's gaze hardened. "Ma'am, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to escalate this matter." Sasha's breath caught. "Escalate," she repeated, her voice rising despite herself. "You've already humiliated me at security, and now you're trying to take my belongings? This is harassment." Her words echoed in the empty corridor, bouncing off the cold walls. The TSA agents exchanged a quick glance, something unspoken passing between them, before the male agent took a step closer. "You need to calm down," he said, his voice laced with condescension. "We're just doing our job." Sasha gritted her teeth, taking a deep breath. She knew she couldn't let her emotions take control, not here, not now. "I'm not going anywhere without my bag," she said, her tone quieter, but unshakable. The male agent opened his mouth to respond. But then, everything shifted. A new figure appeared at the end of the corridor. It was the manager who had confronted her earlier, flanked by 2 security guards. Their presence made the already suffocating space feel even smaller. "What's going on here?" the manager demanded, her sharp voice slicing through the tension like a knife. The female agent straightened. "We're conducting a secondary screening," she said. "She's refusing to comply." Sasha's frustration boiled over. "That's not true," she shot back. "I've done everything you've asked, and now you're trying to take my bag for no reason." The manager's eyes narrowed as she looked Sasha up and down. "This is becoming a disruption, Mississippi. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the airport." The words hit like a slap. Sasha stared at her, disbelief washing over her like ice water. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "I've done nothing wrong." The manager's expression remained stone cold. "We have the right to deny service to anyone who poses a potential security risk." "A security risk?" Sasha's breath hitched. "A security risk," she repeated, incredulous. "You're calling me a security risk because you don't like how I look?" The silence that followed was deafening. The guard stepped forward, their postures stiff, menacing. Sasha's chest tightened, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. This couldn't be happening. No. Not today. She pulled out her phone, hands trembling as she dialed. The manager's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't stop her. Sasha raised the phone to her ear. The call connected instantly. "Dad," she said, her voice barely steady. "I need you. They're kicking me out of the airport." A moment of silence. Then, a calm, steady voice. "Stay where you are. I'll handle it." The call ended. Sasha turned back to the manager, the TSA agents, the security guards, everyone watching her like she was an intruder in her own country. "My father is on his way," she said, her tone carrying the weight of authority beyond her years. "I suggest you think very carefully about what you do next." For the first time, the manager hesitated. Her confidence wavered. But before she could speak, the male agent smirked. "Daddy's coming to save the day, huh?" Sasha's jaw tightened. But she refused to take the bait. Instead, she stepped back, leaning against the wall, waiting. The stares of the guards, the agents, their silent judgment, pressed down on her. But she refused to let them see her break. Beyond the corridor, the noise of the terminal continued as if nothing had happened. Announcements blared. Passengers hurried. The world moved on. But for Sasha, time stood still. Every second stretched into an eternity. Then, footsteps. A measured, familiar rhythm. A calm assurance. The tension in the room shifted. Because at that moment, Barack Obama walked into the corridor. And everything changed. The sound of his approaching footsteps filled the narrow space like distant thunder. His presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. The security guards straightened instinctively, their expressions shifting from detached indifference to focused alertness. The manager faltered, momentarily frozen before forcing herself to adjust her posture, an uneasy smile flickering across her lips. Sasha stepped away from the wall, her relief washing over her like a wave. She had always admired her father's ability to remain composed under pressure. And in this moment, his calm authority felt like a shield, a barrier against the storm of humiliation and frustration that had battered her all morning. Barack's gaze landed on her first. "Miss Obama," he said, his voice measured, as if he hadn't noticed the suffocating tension in the air. "Are you all right?" Sasha nodded, but when she tried to speak, her voice caught in her throat. She swallowed. They were going to kick me out of the airport." Barack's eyes shifted to the manager, his expression unreadable, but heavy with expectation. "Is that true?" His tone was polite, but firm. The manager hesitated, her eyes darting toward the TSA agents, searching for backup. "Sir," she began, her voice tinged with defensive irritation, "we had concerns regarding her behavior. She was becoming disruptive, and we have protocols in place for situations like this." "Disruptive?" Barack repeated the word, his voice dangerously calm. The manager stopped mid-sentence. Because in that moment, she realized exactly who she was speaking to. Airport staff humiliated Sasha Obama, but when her father showed up, everything changed. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Barack Obama raised an eyebrow, his calm exterior unshaken, but there was a sharpness in his tone. "Can you explain exactly how my daughter was being disruptive?" The manager hesitated, but before she could answer, the male TSA agent jumped in, his voice brimming with misplaced confidence. "She refused to comply with our security procedures. We were just doing our job." Sasha shook her head sharply, her anger trembling in her voice. "That's not true. I complied with everything you asked. You treated me like a criminal for no reason. And when I pushed back against the harassment, you decided to call it disruption." The male agent's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The manager, meanwhile, seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of Sasha's words. Barack's gaze swept over the group, his expression hardening. "It seems to me there's been a serious misunderstanding," he said, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable authority. "Let's address this properly. First, my daughter is not leaving this airport unless she decides to. Second, I want a detailed explanation of why she was singled out in the first place." The manager cleared her throat, visibly struggling to regain control of the situation. "Sir, as I said, we have protocols. Her ticket was flagged, and we followed up accordingly." Barack's eyes narrowed slightly. "Flagged for what?" he asked, his patience wearing thin. "She had a valid ticket, a valid ID, and was fully prepared to board her flight. What exactly prompted this additional scrutiny?" The manager faltered, her face reddening. The male TSA agent crossed his arms, doubling down. "Sometimes we have to make judgment calls, especially when something doesn't feel right." Barack tilted his head slightly, repeating the words back. "Something didn't feel right?" His voice dropped slightly to calm, but razor sharp. A shift in the air. A weight pressing down on the room. Barack stepped forward just enough for his presence to feel even more commanding. You made a judgment call based on how my daughter looks, didn't you? The tension in the corridor became suffocating. The female TSA agent glanced nervously at her colleague, but the male agent avoided her gaze. The manager opened her mouth, her voice suddenly shaky. I assure you, sir, we don't tolerate discrimination in this airport. Barack didn't let her finish. That's an admirable policy, he said, his voice cool. But actions speak louder than policies. His words hung in the air, unchallenged. From where I'm standing, this entire situation reeks of bias. My daughter is standing here, humiliated, distressed, because your team decided she didn't belong in business class. His gaze hardened. Am I wrong? No one answered. The silence was deafening. A tacit admission of guilt. Barack exhaled slowly, the weight of disappointment heavy in the air. Finally, he turned to Sasha, his expression softening slightly. Are you ready to go? He asked gently. Sasha nodded, clutching her bag tightly. She was ready to leave this nightmare behind, but part of her bristled at the idea of letting these people off the hook. They turned to leave. Then, wait, sir, the manager stammered, her voice suddenly uncertain. Perhaps we can discuss this further. Barack paused, his back to the group. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, but the warning in his tone was unmistakable. You'll be hearing from me. He let the words sink in. Then, with an air of unshakable finality, he added, and I suggest you prepare yourselves for a thorough review of your so-called protocols. Without another word, he placed a hand on Sasha's shoulder and guided her toward the main terminal. Behind them? Silence. The weight of their departure hung heavy in the air. The walk back, a moment of reflection. As they stepped back into the bustling terminal, the sounds of announcements, hurried footsteps, and murmuring travelers felt almost jarring after the stifling quiet of the corridor. Sasha stole a glance at her father. His expression? Calm. Focused. Unreadable. But she knew him well enough to recognize the sharpness in his otherwise measured stride. The kind of quiet fury he rarely let surface. She let out a shaky breath. Dad, she began hesitantly. I'm sorry you had to come down here. I didn't know what else to do. Barack stopped, turning to face her fully. His hands rested gently on her shoulders. Sasha, you don't have to apologize for standing up for yourself. His voice was firm, but filled with warmth. What happened here today? Unacceptable. And it's not your fault. You did the right thing by calling me. His words soothed some of the tension knotted in her chest. But the sting of the morning's events still lingered. They treated me like I didn't belong, she admitted quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Her father nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. I know. His tone was heavy, with a mix of anger and sadness. And they're going to answer for it. As Barack Obama and his daughter walked back through the airport, the world around them moved on. To everyone else, it was just another morning at the airport. But for Sasha, it was a morning she'd never forget. A reminder that no matter who she was, some people would always question her right to be there. And a lesson that she wouldn't let them win. Sasha Obama humiliated at the airport, but when her father showed up, everything changed. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from. As Sasha sat in the airport terminal, gripping her bag like a lifeline, her father stood beside her, a steady anchor in the chaos. His calm presence reassured her, but the weight of what had just happened still lingered. Dad, I don't want this to happen to anyone else, she said, her voice strained. Barack nodded, his expression firm. It won't. We'll make sure of that. Just then, a nervous airline representative approached, flanked by two stiff-looking staff members. Mr. Obama, she began carefully, on behalf of the airport and our airline, we deeply apologize for any inconvenience. Barack turned to her, his expression unreadable. Inconvenience? His tone was calm, but the edge in his voice made her shift uncomfortably. The woman hesitated. "We take these matters very seriously. We're looking into it." Barack didn't waver. "Looking into it? My daughter was humiliated, singled out, treated like she didn't belong. That's not an inconvenience, it's discrimination. If your staff doesn't know the difference, you have a much bigger problem than you realize." Silence. Finally, the woman stammered, "If there's anything we can do to make this right." "There is," Barack interrupted, his voice measured but firm. "First, I want the names of every TSA agent and staff member involved. Second, I want a full report on the protocols that allowed this to happen. And third, I want action, real action, to ensure this never happens again." The airline rep nodded quickly, scribbling notes, her colleagues exchanging nervous glances. Then came Barack's final warning, low, steady, and impossible to ignore. "Because if I don't see immediate, concrete changes, I'll make sure every major news outlet in the country hears about this." A visible ripple of unease ran through the group. Within minutes, the airline delayed Sasha's flight to accommodate them. As they made their way to the gate, whispers spread among passengers. Some craned their necks, hoping to catch a glimpse of the former president. Sasha kept her head down, exhaustion settling in. At the gate, a nervous agent scanned their passes with exaggerated politeness. "Have a great flight, Mr. Obama," he said, his voice unsteady. Barack offered a curt nod, his focus unwavering. As they settled into their seats, he turned to Sasha. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though the unease lingered. "I'm just tired." Barack placed his hand over hers. "I know. But you did the right thing, standing up for yourself, calling me. That takes courage." Her eyes burned, but she blinked away the tears. "It shouldn't have to." Barack sighed. "You're right. It shouldn't. But until people stop making assumptions based on appearance, we have to keep pushing back." Sasha stared out the window, her thoughts swirling. This wasn't just about her, it was bigger than that. The fallout, a nationwide debate. By the time they landed in New York, the storm had already begun. The airline and TSA announced that the agents involved had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. But Sasha knew that wasn't enough. She voiced her frustration to her father. "Do you think anything will actually change?" Barack met her gaze, his voice steady. "Suspensions are a start, but real accountability runs deeper. We're going to make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug." As they left the airport, Barack was already on the phone, setting a plan in motion. By the next morning, headlines exploded. Sasha Obama targeted at airport, discrimination scandal unfolds. Former president demands accountability for TSA misconduct. Bias at the gates, a call for change. Public reaction was polarized. Supporters demanded justice, while critics accused the Obamas of using their influence unfairly. But one thing was clear, the story had struck a nerve. Days later, an internal TSA investigation was launched. Whistleblowers came forward, exposing a troubling pattern of bias within airport security. The agents involved, including the smirking guard, faced mounting pressure. One TSA officer, Mark Henson, defended his actions. But leaked reports revealed a disturbing history, past complaints, questionable behavior, and a pattern of targeting passengers of color. The backlash was swift. Henson was terminated. The manager who ordered Sasha's removal, forced to resign. For Sasha, the outcome was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but this was just one battle in a much larger fight. Turning pain into purpose. As weeks passed, Sasha refused to let the issue fade. She spoke out, sharing her story on national platforms, using her voice to shine a light on the broader issues of bias and discrimination. Barack stood by her, guiding and encouraging her to find her own voice. "This is your fight too," he told her one evening. "You have the power to make a difference. Don't be afraid to use it." Soon, policy changes followed. Heavy checkmark mandatory bias training for all TSA employees. Heavy checkmark an independent oversight committee to handle complaints. Heavy checkmark a direct hotline for passengers to report misconduct. The impact was immediate. Airports across the country began adopting similar reforms, sparking conversations beyond just airport security into policing, education, and healthcare. One day, Sasha received an email. A woman who had recently traveled through Reagan National Airport wrote, "I don't know what changed, but this time I was treated with kindness and respect. I wanted to thank you. Your story made a difference." Sasha read the message twice. Her heart swelled. She forwarded it to her father. His reply was simple. "This is why we fight." The journey continues. As months passed, Sasha's experience became a symbol of a larger movement. One evening, she and her father sat together, gazing at the city lights. She turned to him. "Do you think things will ever really change?" Barack took a sip of coffee, his gaze steady. "Change is slow. But every step forward matters. Every voice raised, every injustice challenged, it all adds up." Sasha nodded, her resolve strengthening. The road ahead was long and difficult. But she was ready to walk it.